Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, you might notice that I have a beer sat in front of me already, which is quite unusual for my format of reviewing. So what happened was, I sat down to film this review, GoPro was doing its thing, everything seemed to be okay, but when I took the SD card out and put it in my computer, the files just didn't exist. And this is a problem that I've had 4 or 5 times now with this GoPro, and I have to say I'm getting extremely pissed off with it. The GoPro uses a file formatting system called FAT32, which is quite outdated and quite limited, and yeah, it basically breaks my videos up into 10-minute segments and then I've got to edit them together, which is something that I never really wanted to have to do. I just wanted a camera that was good and it filmed the whole thing in one go. But yeah, GoPro doesn't seem to do that, and there's no options in the camera to kind of change what format setting it uses in the recording. So yeah, bit of a catch-22 with this one. I should have just bought a Sony. I thought GoPro would be quite good because they came highly recommended, and it is a shame because it is a really good little piece of kit, but their software is just absolute garbage. So yeah, if you're going to do blogging videos, don't get a GoPro, go for a Sony, do it that way. But yeah, as you can tell, quite annoyed with this one because I thought I did a good first review of this. But it is a very nice beer. We'll do a re-review of it and we'll see how it goes. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel a good few times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, quite a few different styles, but I would say that this brewery is known mainly for their IPAs and for their Imperial Stouts. Quite a few different kinds of IPA in fact as well. But yeah, we're going to head up towards Gothenburg for this one. Göteborg, as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get that Gothenburg catchphrase in when we're reviewing Gothenburg beers because it is just channel tradition these days. And we're going to have a look at yet another beer from Spike Brewery. So this particular beer is called Tappad. It comes in at 6.2% ABV, and this one is a West Coast IPA. So yeah, it was a very nice beer, but we'll go through the tasting and stuff again and see how we go. But this one was released as part of the Lokal och Småskalig assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for June of 2021. They released a couple of beers this month, and Spike Brewery tend to release a good few every month as well. Quite a prolific brewery, so one that is definitely worth keeping an eye on, in my opinion. But yeah, let's see how we get on with this one then. Hopefully the re-review is good, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. Big fan of the West Coast IPAs, as you'll know if you've watched the channel, and I will tell you that this one is pretty nice. So let's crack on then. As always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Spike Brewery before, and you will no doubt see me add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Spike Brewery then once again. So on to my brewery notes. So Spike Brewery, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in Gothenburg, Göteborg, up on the Swedish west coast, and the company was founded back in 2014 by Mats Westberg, Marcus Axberg and Martin Johansson. So all three of these guys had worked together in the IT sector, but it's now only Mats and Marcus that are still active in the company, and they now also have David de Sursi, who joined the company and became the CEO. But the brewer is Bernardo Gava. He comes from Brazil, and he trained in brewing at VLB Berlin, but his family also own their own microbrewery in Brazil as well, which is quite interesting. I'll need to see if I can find out what one it is exactly. But Bernardo came on board with the company in 2017 and has been with them since. But at the moment, they're producing around 250,000 litres of beer per year, and about 25% of that volume is used for contract brewing other breweries' beers. In fact, Bernardo is also employed by Mohawk Brewing Company as well, who brew their beers in the same building. But the brewery itself can be found in the Gamlestaden area. It's a former slaughterhouse, so when you go inside it, there's like bullet holes in the walls and all of these kind of things. If you want a little look at it, you can check out my Out and About video that I did of the Spike Brewery tap room. So you can find that if you go into the Out and About playlist. That was filmed back in about October of 2019, if memory serves me correctly. But they open up the brewery every Saturday for a tap room. They also serve food there, and you can find a few interesting spike beers there that you won't find in other places. But presently, they're looking at opportunities to build their own brewery in another location. And as of June 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced around 115 different kinds of beer. So yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Spike Brewery for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, that's it for your history section. So I'll just let you have a little look at the can art before we get on with tasting the beer again. As you can see, this one is a shiny can, so the camera automatically hates it. But yeah, quite simple artwork on this one. There you can see on the side, there is one of the Spike Brewery symbols, and you'll also get that on the front of the can as well. But yeah, I paid 45 Swedish kronor for this one. €4.50 roughly, £4 sterling, and I guess somewhere in the region of $5.25 American, just so that those of you watching across the world have a little bit of a price reference, and that's a fairly standard price through Systembolaget for a Swedish brewed IPA. If you had the equivalent beer from, say, Denmark or something, you would probably pay 10 kroners more for it because of the import fee. The import company has to, of course, take a slice of that, but yeah, fairly standard price for a single IPA here in Sweden, about 45 Swedish kronor. But yeah, nicely presented can, as you can see. So I'll just line it up again so that my OCD is happy. And yeah, when I poured the beer at first, it came out with about a half finger of a kind of creamy coloured head, and that faded away quite quickly to just be a kind of thin foamy layer. Wasn't too much visible carbonation on it, but yeah, it had a little bit of a kind of natural haze to it, which I think, to be honest, has kind of faded away at this point in time. I guess you can still see it a little bit. It still has a little bit of that kind of natural haze to it that it had originally. There were one or two bubbles sticking to the side of it, but yeah, otherwise it was kind of quite a calm looking beer. But as you can see with this one, it comes in with a nice kind of quite rich amber colour, of course. It's not the darkest of amber that you're going to come across from a West Coast IPA. And it's not the lightest either, it's somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. So remember, when it comes to the colour of your beer, that's determined by 1, the type of malts that you use, that determines the magnitude of the colour, 2, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. And then any adjuncts or barrel aging is also going to play a role there. But yeah, those last two variables are not at play in this particular brew, if you like. But yeah, it certainly looks pretty nice, this one, and nothing unexpected from this beer in terms of what you would be expecting from a West Coast IPA. So yeah, a little bit of natural haze and a nice kind of rich ambery colour. So yeah, let's take a second look at the aroma and just see how we get on with this one then. Really curious to see, again, if I still pick up the same stuff. So yeah, what I'm noticing about it now is it does have a little bit more kind of bite to it in the aroma than it had originally. When I first poured it, it was really kind of oily and sort of sweet in a sense, and it had a big juiciness to it, but there was a lot of wet grassy character in there, which has kind of changed a bit to be a little bit more kind of you know, sort of piney and floral, if you like. So yeah, yeah, but it was actually quite difficult when we first opened it up, or when you know, to kind of pick out exactly what was going on in the aroma, because there was just so much kind of big, fresh, wet, grassy qualities coming out of it. But it has, you know, it's mellowed out quite interestingly, this one. So I guess in a way, this review could be interesting in a sense to just, you know, get an idea of how beers open up a little bit more when you have them sitting for a little while. But yeah, it comes across, you know, the first thing I noticed about this one before was that it came across as very authentic. One of the things that I think is critical for a West Coast IPA is to get the malt base right, and you do get that in this one. The thing to note about this beer as well is that it has oats in it, and I think this is a little bit unusual for West Coast IPAs. I've seen them with a little bit of wheat in them, of course, but it's not too often that you will find a West Coast IPA with oat in it, as far as I'm aware. Do let me know about that in the comment section below if I'm wrong, though. Usually these are mainly barley malt focused, but sometimes, as I say, a little touch of wheat in them. But yeah, it comes the wheaty side of the oaty side of the the beer comes out really nicely in the flavour, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, aroma wise with this one, the malty side of things, you can smell a mix of a sort of white and kind of brown bready backbone to this one. It does get a little bit more grainy, of course, the more that you kind of smell of it. So yeah, it's got a typical kind of backbone in there with that nice mix of white and brown bread, a little bit of bread crust, of course. And when I smelt it the first time, you could actually smell a little bit of a kind of a very slight oaty creaminess to it, and you do get a little bit of an oaty sort of sweetness out of this one too, which is quite interesting. You still get it coming out of the beer at this stage, but yeah, there's quite a bit of kind of brown sugar in this one. You can smell it's got a little bit of that more kind of boozy, kind of concentrated caramel that you would expect of the West Coast IPA. As I've explained in other West Coast IPA reviews, I think there's two directions you can take these beers in. They can be a little bit more kind of bready and biscuity, such as Pliny the Elder, or they can be a wee bit more kind of oily and caramelly, such as, you know, the Sierra Nevada Torpedo. Those are just the 2 points of reference I have. You guys might have something different. But yeah, this one, for me, strikes me as being... I said at the time, the first time I reviewed it, I said it strikes me as being right in the middle of the spectrum, and I would stick with that. But I said it leaned slightly towards that biscuity, bready kind of thing. But when I smell it now, it does actually have a little bit more kind of caramelly and oiliness to it, but it still has a lot of the biscuit at the same time. So it's almost as if the kind of brown sugars darken up a little bit, but it's certainly got a kind of concentrated caramel to it. There's a wee touch of a tiny toasted element to it, but there's a lot of that McVitie's digestive biscuity cookie aroma coming out of the beer now, which is quite interesting. And initially, I also picked up 1 or 2 little woody undertones to it, which I'm not really getting at this point in time. But yeah, this one, it comes across as a little bit more kind of boozy and sort of sticky in the malt base compared to what it did before. But yeah, the malt base on this one is pretty authentic and pretty nice. It's a kind of, as I say, a biscuity, bready leaning IPA, this one. So yeah, it goes together very, very nicely in that sense. But yeah, I think that covers the malt base as much as we need to. The other thing you will notice in this one, and I actually can't remember whether I picked it out in the aroma first off or whether I picked it out in the flavour first off, but I notice it in the aroma now, is that there's a wee bit of a kind of crispy dryness in that malt base as well, and that is a little bit of Pilsner malt. I suspect that there's some kind of Pilsner malt in this one, potentially a Carapils or something. So yeah, keep your eye on the aroma for that. As I say, I can't remember where I picked that up in the original review, but it comes out in the taste for sure. But yeah, hoppy side of the aroma then. This one for me, it's got a big green component to it, and like I say, the green component has changed a little bit. When I first smelled it, it was very big and wet and grassy. Now you've still got a good bit of that grassy character, but you can smell the sort of piney resins and the floral aromaticity coming out of this one quite a bit more. So there's a wee touch of earthiness, big deep piney resinous quality, a little bit of a floral aromaticity, and also some of that nice bright zesty kind of grassy colour. So yeah, I do like how the green component of this one goes together. It's proper old school, and the other thing about this one is that I think it's got old school hops in it for sure. So what I was thinking when I first smelt it, there's a bit of Cascade and Chinook in this one. The pine resin was making me think, yeah, a little bit of Chinook in there, but it's also got this little kind of figgy, red fruity quality coming out of it, and that made me think, yeah, that's Cascade. The reason I'm quite good at picking up Cascade, I would say, is because one of my local breweries back home in Scotland, the Harveston Brewery, one of my favourite beers from them, or probably my favourite beer from them, the favourite beer, would be the Schahalium, which is a Czech Pilsner style beer, but it uses Cascade hops. So very familiar with the Cascade hop, and this beer has a little bit of that kind of soft, figgy, red fruity note that you often get from Cascade. One thing I also know about West Coast IPAs is that some brewers actually use a little touch of like a fruity sugar in them as well, and it was a home brewer actually that told me that. He brewed one, and it tasted extremely authentic, and with a lot of the other beers that I have over there. And I think it was plum sugar that he'd used in his, and it worked out really nicely. And he told me that this technique was quite common. Not sure how common it is, right enough. Again, if you know about this, let me know in the comment section below. I'd be really interested to hear that. But you do get a little bit of this vibe out of this beer. This beer really has a little touch of a kind of figgy underlining to it. But on the more kind of concentrated and pungent elements of the fruits, what you do get is a good bit of an oily mango In the aroma, I think there's a wee bit of a passion fruit in this one too. I picked up that I thought it was quite a bright, passion fruity, grapefruity sort of thing out of this. So I thought, it would be interesting if there was a wee bit of talus in here, but I don't know how popular that hop is in Sweden at the moment. But yeah, mangoes, a little bit of passion fruit, a little bit of grapefruit, as I said, but there is a good little bit of an orangey character to this one as well, a kind of tangerine orange. So I think a wee touch of mosaic in here, and the earthiness does make me think a bit of mosaic. So yeah, it could be a Citra Mosaic West Coast IPA, this one, with a bit of Cascade and Chinook in there. I wouldn't be surprised if it's something like that. The whole aroma of this beer does come across as quite familiar in a sense. But yeah, I hope that's a good kind of re-smelling of this beer for you with some afterthoughts. But yeah, I think we can have a second taste of this one now and see how we go. So yeah, this is the Tappad 6.2% West Coast IPA from Spike Brewery in the Gamlestaden area in Gothenburg here in Sweden. Let's get stuck into this one. Slange, skål, cheers. So yeah, it's still pretty nice, this one. What I said about it at the time is that it was quite a light and slick West Coast IPA, and my opinion of that hasn't changed. Actually, my opinion of that hasn't really changed at all. It still has that kind of vibe to it. But yeah, straight away across the what you'll notice about this one is that straight away across that middle third of your palate, you're getting that nice kind of grainy, bready backbone to it. So the backbone of this beer is a mixture of kind of brown bread and white bread, and that really comes out nicely. But if we focus on that middle third of your palate, then as you go to either end of that, you will get a little bit more of a kind of grainy bread crust at either side. Underneath the front half of that middle third of your palate, you'll get a little touch of a more kind of woody flavour coming out of the beer. It's not quite as prominent as it was when I first opened up the beer, I don't think, but it does come out there, and you will notice that coming out a wee bit more the further that you go into the aftertaste. But sitting on top of this nice kind of grainy, bready layer, you can feel down the middle line of your tongue the kind of smoothness from the oats, and it's a little bit sweet in that sense too, but you can feel a wee bit of the oaty character just kind of creeping out towards the edge of the tongue there. So I do like how that goes together. But yeah, I do think that the thing that you will notice about this beer, the more that I drink of it, the more you get that kind of oaty smoothness in there, and it's an interesting thing to think about with a West Coast IPA, because as I say, I don't think this is overly common. But what you'll notice as well is that on top of the oaty layer, as you go from the dead centre of your palate towards the kind of back of that middle third of your palate, there is a bit of a kind of dryness there, and I suspect that that's a little bit of Pilsner malt. Not anywhere near as prominent now as it was when I initially tasted it, but yeah, certainly you can still pick up a little bit of that. But if you go to the middle part of your palate, you've got a nice kind of like oval there, and this is where the brown sugary elements are coming out of the beer. So in the dead centre of that, you've got a nice kind of concentrated caramel in there. As you move further out from that, it gets a little bit kind of brighter and less boozy in a sense, and then as you move towards the very edges of the palate, it's got a little bit more of a kind of biscuity. It does have a little bit more of a kind of biscuity, McVitie's digestive sort of thing coming out of it. So yeah, the way that goes together, I think, is is really quite nice in this one for sure. So yeah, the brown sugars are still quite similar in this one, but yeah, I think the oatiness sweetens up a little bit more, and the kind of pilsnery malt crispness isn't quite the same. So maybe you need a little bit of a kind of lower temperature to the beer to get the kind of pilsnery malt crispness out of it. But the malty side of this one, as I say, I think is really quite well done in a sense. It comes across as quite authentic. When it comes to West Coast IPAs, I want them to be authentic. I kind of like the proper old school versions of them are. But remember, the main difference between a modern West Coast IPA and the old school ones that I would have drunk around 2011, 2012 or whatever would be the bitterness, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. But yeah, Onto the back third of your palate then. So border region between middle third and back third of your palate, there's a nice little bit of a kind of bready build up there again, and a bit of bread crust. And as you go into that back third of your palate, you can feel a little bit of a kind of smooth, you feel a little bit of the smooth kind of white bready and grainy elements sitting in there. There's a wee touch of the oatiness on top of that. You do get a wee bit of that, but I think the further back on the palate you go, the more it starts to become a little, bit more kind of grainy in a sense. But sitting on top of that, that back third of your palate, you'll notice on the bready notes you're getting a little bit more of a kind of airy. Kind of bready note coming out of the beer for sure. You can feel a little bit of the yeasty character in there. So when you come from the back of that back third of your palate, you'll feel the flavour just condenses down a little bit as you go further forward. Then as you reach the middle third of your palate, the flavours are a little bit more squashed together in a sense, which I think works very, very well. So yeah, it goes together nicely in that. The malty side of this beer I think is authentically done, and it works well. The sort of crispness that you get, I think, yeah, the further you go into the aftertaste with it, you can pick up a little bit of that Pilsner, what I suspect is a Carapils malty crispness in this one. But yeah, it works. Hoppy side of things then. Back corners of the palate, there is a nice little touch of earthiness to this one there, and you're going to get that. I think Chinook will give you a little bit of that, and I suspect Mosaic is in this beer too, so you'll get a little bit of that out there. But as you move further forward, there's a little touch of herbal quality there, but as you push towards the front corners of the palate, you can feel a nice kind of deep pine resinous quality there, and as you reach the very front tip of the palate, on top of that, you've got a little bit of a kind of spicy floral aromatic sort of thing. I suspect the bittering hops in this beer, I do suspect it's Chinook is one of them. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a wee bit of Columbus in there as well because of the spiciness that the beer has. But I do suspect Chinook and Columbus in this one because there's just something really familiar about this. And I think Cascade potentially could be used as a bit of a bittering hop as well. As I said, I heavily suspect there's Cascade and there's something old school about the kind of green component in this beer, but it works. Round the front curve of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of a lighter kind of grassy element to it as well. And again, I can very much appreciate that in this beer. The grassiness has a little touch of a zesty character as well, which I can certainly appreciate. So yeah, you can feel that zestiness building up a little bit the further that you go into the aftertaste with this one. But yeah, the green component is pretty standard on this one for sure. But let's focus on the kind of fruity part of the beer then. So as I always say with these beers, fruity part of the beer comes out in that front third of your palate. You get that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. But the base underneath that, you've got a little bit on that front and that border region between front third and middle third of your palate. Again, a bit of a bready build up, a wee touch of a kind of bread crusty thing there. Then the base of that front third of your palate is the kind of bready elements we talked about before, a mix of a white and brown bread, and you can feel a wee bit of the oaty smoothness in there too. And on top of that, you've got the fruits, and the fruits come out as being a little bit oily and a little bit slick, which is what you want from a West Coast IPA. So if you go towards the back of that front third of your palate, there's definitely a bit of a straight up grapefruit, which could be Chinook, and again, it would be a little bit of a the Cascade, I think, could contribute to that as well. But sitting just on top of that slightly oaty layer that's there, you can feel a bit of that lighter kind of figgy, that sort of light kind of juicy figgy note quality, which I suspect is a bit of Cascade in this. It's just very familiar. As I say, it's something I'm just overly familiar with, that hop, of course, and I suspect quite heavily that there's some of that in here. So yeah, but as you go forward from that very back part of the front third of your palate, it does mellow out a wee bit. You get a wee touch of passion fruit, and then you get a nice kind of juicy mangoey note as you move towards the midpoint of that front third of your tongue. So there's quite an oily mango to this one. I do wonder if it could be a bit of citra in here, but then as you move into the front half of that front third of your palate, the beer does become a little bit more sort of orangey. I do wonder if it could be, it's got a nice oiliness to it, this one, and it's quite a bright orange that you get out of the beer. So I do wonder, could it be a bit of Amarillo that's in this? Amarillo has been gaining popularity again in Sweden. There's something that tells me it could be Amarillo, because it just doesn't feel quite light enough, in a sense, to be Mosaic. It's got a bit more zest to it as well. I think the Amarillo is a little bit more zesty than than Mosaic is. So that's an interesting point. You'll also notice there's a wee tiny touch of lime just before you reach the very front tip of your palate as well. And if citrus in there, that can contribute a sort of lemon limey component to the beer as well. But I do wonder if this is Citra Amarillo and then a little bit more of a kind of Cascade, Chinook and Columbus. There's just something about this beer that feels quite familiar and old school in a sense from the flavour profile. But I like that. I do like beers that give you a little bit of nostalgia. So yeah, this one ticks the boxes for me. It's a very authentic, kind of more old school West Coast IPA. So thumbs up to Spike Brewery for trying something a little bit different. This is potentially the most authentic West Coast IPA that they've done so far, if I can sort of make such a statement. I think, yeah, probably you would call it authentic, because the main difference, as I say, between the modern takes on the West Coast IPA and the older ones is the bitterness. But I think on this note, it's probably a good idea to move on to the mouthfeel to round off the review. So yeah, I would describe this beer as being, it's kind of right in the middle of the spectrum. I think when I described it before, I said it was leaning towards the bottom end of mid-body because it felt quite crisp in a sense, but as you let it warm up a bit, it's obviously going to thicken out a little bit. Makes sense. But yeah, carbonation on this one very smooth. It's got a nice kind of slick, oily character to it, as we said, and the carbonation is quite smooth as well. Just not quite as crisp as it was originally, but nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Quite interesting experiment, I have to say. But yeah, mouthfeel overall, yeah, mid-bodied, kind of smooth and slick, and just a smooth carbonation. And that's kind of what you'd expect from a West Coast IPA. You do want them to be a little bit more oily to promote that kind of more boozy, caramelly note that these beers often have. But yeah, hoppy side of things then, bitterness. Now, I guessed before that this one was maybe 50 or 60 IBUs. It doesn't feel quite as bitter now, but I think when it comes to IBUs, it's all about impact in a sense. And I think as you kind of drink more and more of a beer, the impact of the IBUs drops off a little bit. So that's one of the other annoying things with doing re-reviews, if you like, or retastings. But yeah, I think I guessed about 50 or 60 IBUs with this beer before, and I think I would stick with that. I think it has got a wee bit more bitterness to it. I think probably about 50 is a reasonable guess for this one. But remember, this is my weakest point of beer reviewing, so always take my IBU counts with a bit of a pinch of salt, because so they're all over the place sometimes compared to what the actual count is. But yeah, malty side of this beer, as I say, it's got a bit of a graininess to it, but it's got a lovely kind of smoothness and a sort of sweetness to it, a little bit of a kind of boozy character in there as well. But yeah, the oily, the kind of oily caramelly side of this beer is very nice, and a nice sort of smooth kind of bready note underneath. So the malt base is quite well balanced, and again, very authentic as to what you would expect from this style. But lovely, juicy, and still quite oily, fruity character out of this one, which again is another inherent trait of a West Coast IPA. But yeah, I think we can round off the review there then. A solid, really authentic, old school West Coast IPA for me. So big thumbs up to Spike. I said in the other video that I thought this one could make a very good core West Coast IPA if they were to go down that route, and I would stick with that statement. This is very, very nicely done, and I think it's a bit of a shame if they only do this beer once. I think this is one that they need to kind of bring back at some stage, because this is pretty solid, and as I say, it's a very authentic old school West Coast IPA. This one, not quite the same level of bitterness, but it's got everything else going for it. So yeah, they have to do this with the bitterness, I think, in these beers these days, because people are used to the New England haze craze. But for the old folk like me, we're a bit stuck in the mud, and we want the bitterness from these. But yeah, solid beer from Spike Brewery once again. This is what we've come to expect, and I think we can leave it at that for this review. So yeah, once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and the rant as well about how GoPro's filing system is stupid at the start of the video. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know your own thoughts about this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Spike Brewery as well. We will return to these guys at some point soon, and I will catch you guys in another review. This one was the Tappad, a 6.2% West Coast IPA from Spike Brewery in Gamlestaden in Gothenburg, up on the Swedish West Coast. Slange, skull, and cheers.